The year is 845, the city of Paris, population approximately 20,000 people, the most important city in the Frankish kingdom, the political and cultural center of the largest Christian empire in Western Europe, protected by river barriers, by fortifications, by the full military resources of a kingdom that had conquered most of continental Europe under Charlemagne. And a Norse fleet of 120 longships is sailing up the Seine toward it. Not sneaking, not hiding, sailing, in formation, in daylight. In the Frankish king, Charles the Bald, assembled his army on both banks of the river to stop them. He divided his force, half on the north bank, half on the south, to prevent the Norse fleet from choosing which side to engage. It was a reasonable tactical decision. It was the wrong tactical decision. The Norse commander, a man the sagas call Ragnar, did not engage either force. He sailed between them. Through the gap created by the division Charles had made to prevent exactly that. And then he stopped. On the north bank, in full view of the Frankish army, the Norse took 111 Frankish prisoners and hanged them. The psychological effect on the Frankish army, watching their countrymen executed in full sight, unable to respond, unable to cross the river, was total. Charles paid 7,000 pounds of silver to make them leave. This was not a battle. It was a demonstration. A demonstration of what Norse maritime superiority actually meant, the ability to choose, at every moment, exactly which engagement to take. To be, in the fullest military sense, uncatchable, until they chose to be caught. To understand Norse naval supremacy, you need to understand what naval warfare looked like for everyone else. In the 9th century, naval warfare for most Mediterranean and European powers was an extension of land warfare. Ships were troop transports. The tactical model was straightforward. Sail toward the enemy fleet, close the distance. Grapple the opposing ships together to create a fixed fighting platform. And then fight on the locked ships the way you would fight on land. Boarding actions. Hand-to-hand combat on decks, the ship as a vehicle for bringing soldiers into contact with other soldiers. In this model, the specific sailing qualities of the ship mattered less than the number of soldiers it carried. A larger crew that could overwhelm defenders in boarding combat beat a smaller crew in better ships. Naval battles were decided by the same factors that decided land battles: numbers, armor, weapon quality, individual fighting skill. The Norse did not fight this way. Not because they could not, because they did not have to. A ship that can be sailed faster, in shallower water, in more weather conditions, with fewer crew, and that can be launched from or recovered to a beach rather than requiring a harbor, is not just a better ship. It is a fundamentally different strategic instrument. It does not need to win naval battles. It needs to avoid them when losing is possible, and force them when winning is certain. And the longship, with its shallow draft, its speed under sail and oar, its ability to operate in river systems, its capacity to be dragged overland between river systems, gave its commanders exactly this capability. The choice of engagement. Always. The river strategy. This is the element of Norse naval dominance that the popular imagination, focused on open ocean raids and dramatic sea crossings, consistently underestimates. The great river systems of Europe were not obstacles to Norse military operations. They were highways. The Seine, the Loire, the Rhine, the Thames, the Liffey, the Volga, the Dnieper. Every major river system in Europe and Russia was navigable by a vessel drawing 1 meter of water for hundreds of miles inland. The longship drew 1 meter. No other military vessel of comparable capacity in the 9th century came close to this. Byzantine warships, the dromon, the primary naval vessel of the most sophisticated maritime power in the medieval world, drew 2 to 3 meters minimum. Frankish river patrol vessels, hastily built in response to Norse incursions, drew similar depths and were slower and less maneuverable in every measurable way. The Norse moved through the river systems of Europe with a freedom of action that was, from the perspective of the defending powers, simply incomprehensible. A Norse fleet that entered the Seine at its mouth could reach Paris. A Norse fleet that entered the Loire could reach Tours. The Rhine gave access to the heart of the Frankish kingdom. The Thames gave access to London and beyond. These were not the defended coastlines where the defending powers had at least some warning time and some possibility of organizing a response. These were the interiors, the places where the wealth was concentrated, where the monasteries and the trading centers and the royal residences were built on the assumption that the sea was far away. The longship erased that assumption, made the interior as accessible as the coast, made every river a potential raid route, and created a defensive problem that the 9th century powers of Europe had no answer for. Because you cannot defend every river, not with the military resources available, not with the response times possible, not against an enemy that can be anywhere on the water before you know they have left where they were. The fleet coordination system. Individual longships were remarkable tactical instruments, but what made Norse naval power strategically dominant was not individual ships. It was the ability to coordinate multiple ships across large distances toward unified objectives. The Norse fleet coordination system was not written down. No tactical manuals survive, no command doctrine documents, no organizational charts. What survives is the record of what the fleets did. And what the fleets did reveals a command and communication system sophisticated enough to operate across hundreds of miles of coastline simultaneously. The 865 Great Heathen Army that invaded England is the most dramatic example. Multiple Norse forces, drawn from different political groups, different family networks, different home territories, coordinating a sustained campaign, agreeing on targets, timing their operations to deny the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms the ability to concentrate force against any single Norse element, dividing and reuniting as tactical situations required. This level of coordination does not happen without a command structure. The Norse command structure was not hierarchical in the Roman or Byzantine military sense. It was consensual. The Jarl led by a combination of demonstrated competence, personal authority, and the specific quality the Norse called drengskaper. He did not command compliance, he earned it. And the warriors who followed him were not soldiers obeying orders. They were free men who had chosen to follow. This created a command relationship that was, paradoxically, both more fragile and more robust than hierarchical military command. More fragile, because a Jarl whose judgment failed lost his followers immediately. There was no institutional authority to compel obedience. More robust because the men who were following because they believed in the plan. Men who follow because they choose to follow are more reliable under pressure. The Norse knew this and built their culture around it. The psychological warfare system. The operations at Paris in 845 were not cruelty for its own sake. It was a calculated psychological operation. The will to defend was as important as the capacity to defend. A population that believed resistance was futile would not resist. The Norse reputation itself was a strategic asset. The terror that preceded their arrival, maintained by chroniclers who recorded every operation in detail, worked in their favor. Towns paid tribute before the fleet anchored. Churches sent emissaries with silver before the warriors landed. Political leaders negotiated before military contact. The Norse were careful to maintain the reputation that made resistance seem futile. Through selective, visible, carefully calibrated demonstrations of what resistance cost. The harbor chain defense. The Frankish response included chains at Pitres and Paris to block longship passage. Attempts to create physical barriers. The Norse response to the chain strategy was characteristically direct. They portaged around it, dragged the ships out of the water, carried them overland past the obstacle, and relaunched on the other side. A longship fully loaded weighed approximately 20 tons. Moving it required rollers, ropes, and the coordinated effort of the crew. The Norse did it anyway, because the alternative was to concede the river to the chain. And conceding the river was not something the Norse tactical doctrine recognized as an option. The chain was an obstacle. The obstacle had a solution. The solution was physically demanding and tactically unusual. They executed it. Here is what the story of Norse naval dominance leaves out. It ended. Not because someone defeated the Norse at sea, Because the conditions that produced Norse naval dominance changed. The specific combination of factors that made the longship tactically dominant. Its shallow draft advantage, its speed advantage, its ability to operate in river systems that defensive forces could not enter, was dependent on the defending powers not adapting. They adapted. The bridge fortifications that Alfred the Great of England built across English rivers in the 880s, a systematic network of defended bridgeworks that the Norse could not portage around, without exposing themselves to attack from both banks simultaneously, reduced the utility of the river strategy in England. The Boer system, Alfred's network of fortified towns positioned to ensure that no point in his kingdom was more than a day's march, from a defensible position, reduced the exploitable gap between Norse landing and defending response. The coastal patrol vessels that the Frankish kingdoms began deploying, smaller, shallower, faster than the cargo vessels, narrowed the speed and maneuverability advantage, slowly, imperfectly, over decades. But the adaptations accumulated, and here is the part that changes how you read the end of the Viking Age. The Norse did not stop raiding because they were defeated. They stopped raiding because the returns declined. The wealth that had been extractable from undefended coastlines and river interiors became less accessible as defending powers improved their responses. The mathematics of raiding, risk versus return, shifted. Not catastrophically, not suddenly, but persistently, in the same way that the Norse had always approached problems, with the cold-eyed calculation of people for whom survival was a numbers game. The Norse commanders of the later Viking Age looked at the changed landscape and made a different calculation. Raiding was harder, trading was easier, settlement was possible. And the same people who had been the most effective raiders in the medieval world became traders, became settlers, became, in Normandy and England and Russia and Sicily, the nobility of the kingdoms they had once terrorized, not because they were defeated, because they were practical. The longship did not become obsolete, it became unnecessary. When the world changed enough that sailing a ship full of warriors to a defended coastline and fighting your way ashore cost more than it returned, the Norse stopped doing it and started doing something else, as they always had. In 1967, a Norwegian maritime archaeologist named Ole Crumlin Pedersen proposed an experiment. He wanted to sail a Viking Age longship reconstruction from Denmark to Norway. Not a museum piece, not a display vessel. A working ship, built using Viking Age methods, sailed by a crew learning to use it the way it was designed to be used. The experiment took decades to realize fully. But the ships were built and sailed. And the people who sailed them reported the same thing. Something that does not come through in academic analysis. The longship is alive. That is the word the sailors used, consistently. Not a poetic exaggeration, a description of a physical experience. The hull that was built to flex, built to move with the water rather than resist it, responds to wave action in a way that no modern vessel does. It moves, continuously, subtly, in ways that communicate the state of the water beneath it through the deck to the bodies of everyone on board. You feel the ocean through a longship in a way that modern vessels, steel hulls, rigid structures, engine-powered, prevent. And what that feeling produces was an intimacy with the sea that no defending power of the 9th century could match. Not because the Norse were braver, not because they were stronger, because they knew the water, in their bodies, from years of feeling it. The Frankish soldier on the riverbank watching the Norse fleet pass could see what the ships were doing. He could not feel what the Norse commander felt. The specific quality of the current, the way the wind was building, the information felt through the ship was simply not available to the defender. That information gap was Norse naval dominance, not the ships, not the tactics, the intimacy, the knowledge that comes only from living on it. It cannot be built quickly, cannot be purchased, can only be accumulated. One crossing at a time, one generation at a time, until the hull flexes and the sailor feels it, and knows, without thinking, what the water is doing, and what to do next. The longships are in museums now, The Oseberg, the Gokstad, still beautiful, still communicating something that resists description, built for conditions that no longer exist, on a sea that is still there, still doing exactly what it has always done, not caring. Because the sea does not keep records, it just keeps moving. As it always has, as it always will, long after the last longship, long after the last sailor who could feel the hull flex. The water is still there, waiting for whoever learns to read it next.